Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Allison, and I'm the community manager at Ning. I'm here with Juana from the Ning advocacy team and Richard Millington, the founder of Feverbee, an online community consultancy and your answer master for this session. So this is our sixth, really, in a series of community management talks with Richard. Richard has already shared strategies for generating activity, managing growth, facilitating member engagement, and the science that powers it all. The topic for today's discussion is converting newcomers into active members of your community. So hopefully you all got a chance to watch the recording of last week's presentation in which Richard reviewed some of the stratified sampling techniques, other measurement techniques, and ways to identify kind of the pain points or choke points in your community, the points where members really drop out and don't, either just post once or, post one or two times and then are never heard from again. So, we're all pretty familiar with this. I actually did the data exercise and got some interesting insights into my own community. Of course, every community is different, whether it's a passion community or a product support group or organization or recreation, all of these things that bring us together online and maybe present different challenges as you acquire new members and try to turn them into great community advocates. So what we'd really like to do is keep this session very open. It's going to be all about you. We want to give you some time to get your questions answered by Richard. So if you did take part in or did watch the presentation last week and got some of that data for your community and have questions about that or about, basics of a welcome packet or anything, really, we'd love to hear from you. So please do start submitting those questions right now so we can keep just a consistent flow of questions and answers throughout the session. So to submit a question, just pop out the little questions box on your GoToWebinar panel and type it in right there. That'll go to Juana, Richard, and myself, and I'll be asking Richard those questions on your behalf. So a bit of background on Richard. He's spent the last 10 years mastering a range of social sciences and refining key community management skills, learning how to use and apply data and collaborating with over 100 different organizations. So if you haven't checked out his latest book, Buzzing Communities, How to Build Bigger, Better, and More Active Online Communities, it's a really great hard look at the social science behind online community management, and will definitely tip you off to some new ways to motivate your members and really build a thriving online community. So I'll also invite you to contribute to the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag NingTalk, NingTalk. And no worries if you have to leave a little early today. We'll post the recording on our Vimeo and YouTube channels, as well as on our blog, cultivate.ning.com. So thank you all for joining us today. Please do start submitting those questions. I'm going to hand it over to Richard so he can give you a little background and overview, and then we'll get going.
Thanks for that, and it's great to be back. Let me begin with a quick apology for last week. I really wanted to do that webinar live, but unfortunately I had a sore throat and completely lost my voice, which would have made doing the webinar incredibly interesting. So I'm going to quickly go over a couple of the concepts in case you weren't able to attend that webinar last week. I want to begin by explaining why this is so important. About a year and a half ago, we were approached by an organization that were complaining of a big issue in their community. The members were fighting with each other a lot, and they were trying to come up with a variety of different ways to resolve this, and they were spending a lot of time trying to think of a way to stop members fighting with each other. And what we did, we came in and we looked at what the data said. We looked at a variety of different data points, And what we discovered that in this community, for every 1,000 members that visited the landing page, that homepage of the community, only one of them was a regular member 6 months later. And the thing about converting newcomers into regulars is that if it's not going well, it's a problem that you don't see. Unless you're measuring your data, unless you're looking at where members are dropping out, this could be something that's happening in your community as well. You could have a lot of members that are visiting your community homepage, a lot that are registering, and then they drop out at various places along the way. And what we want to do is try and stop this, because if you can stop this, this is one of the single easiest, quickest ways that you can build a much bigger online community than what you have now. So there are a couple of key concepts involved here. One of the most important ones is to make sure that you have the most interested members visiting your platform to begin with. A lot of people, when they try to grow their online community, they wait for people to visit the page. They don't do any outbound promotion. They don't try and find the people that are most likely to be regular members of that community and then try and convert them into regular members. Because it's a lot easier to convert these sorts of members, to find the members that are most interested in that topic and convert them into regular members, than it is to wait for people to visit your platform and then hopefully get lucky with them. So one of the key things you can do to instantly improve your conversion ratio right now is to go out there and look for people that are talking about your topic on Twitter or on Facebook or on LinkedIn, or attend meetup groups that are relevant to your sector and let them know about the community. Invite them to the community. And another thing that's important and that's connected with this is that when you do try to grow a community, it's not enough simply to promote the community. It's relatively easy to get someone to visit your community platform, and it's not that difficult to get someone to register for your community platform, but it's far more difficult to keep them active. What this means is that when you're trying to grow a community, you have to give yourself more time to convert these newcomers into regular members. It means that you need to stop doing something else that you're doing right now. You have to sacrifice something else in your day so you have more time to convert these newcomers into regulars. I would say for every about 1 minute you spend recruiting someone to join, you're going to need an extra 3 minutes to convert them into a regular member. Now those figures are extremely rough, but that 1-to-3 ratio is probably around the right mark. So you need to give yourself a lot of time to convert these newcomers into regular members of your community. The third thing that I want to talk about is that you don't want an explosion of growth. If you have 1,000 people or 5,000 people that visit your community tomorrow, hardly any of them will convert into regular members or will still be participating in your community 6 months from now. That's because newcomers need your time and they need your personal attention. And it's going to be very difficult if you have 1,000 people visiting your community tomorrow to convert any of them into active members. And this is for a variety of reasons. But one of the other things that when you have so many people visiting your platform at once, it kind of destroys the sense of community that already exists. Imagine you're visiting a community and you're a regular member of a community, and then the next day there are thousands of discussions about topics that you've discussed many times before and are being dealt with and are quite tired topics. Imagine if you visit one of your favorite communities tomorrow and you don't recognize most of the other people that are participating in that community. Your level of participation instantly drops. So a massive explosion of new members can do more harm than good. What you want instead is slow, steady, reliable growth. You want to find sources of growth that continually bring new members into your community. You don't want one sudden promotional push. You want a steady build-up of word-of-mouth activity, of direct recruitment activity that you can always count upon. And most importantly, you then have the time to convert a large percentage of these newcomers into regular members. Next, one of the simplest ways that you can improve your conversion ratio right now is to stop telling people to join your community. Instead of promoting the community itself, tell members to participate in something within the community. Don't promote the community, promote something happening within the community. Promote some activity or discussion or something that's going on within the community. When you do that, people are far more motivated to get through that registration page. And also when they visit that platform, they're primed already to participate in something. So instead of visiting and browsing around and being a passive recipient, they're primed to participate in something straight away. What you have when people visit your community platform for the first time is a relatively small window to get them to participate. If they don't participate within that small window, what typically happens is that they become lurkers. They train themselves to lurk in a community instead of training themselves to participate in that community. So we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of that window. It's worth spending some time focusing upon those people that have recently joined your community, even more time perhaps than your regular members, because you have such a short window to convert these people into regular active members. If you have a community, what we recommend you do is to imagine the conversion process as a sales funnel. So if you don't know what a sales funnel, basically imagine a funnel where at the top you have your prospects and then your interested prospects and then people that you're tentatively agreeing a deal with and then customers. And imagine at each stage there are people dropping out. The same thing is generally true for communities as well. So at the top level of that funnel, we might have, for example, people that are visiting your platform for the first time. And then at the next level, we'll have people that have registered for that platform. And then at the next level, we'll have people that have made their first contribution to that platform. And then beyond that, we have people that are still participating in your community 6 months later. So what we want to do is identify, using our data, using the metrics that we have, exactly where people are dropping out here. So you can tell if they're visiting the platform compared with if they're registering for that platform, simply by looking at the number of people that visit your platform, those unique new visitors, to the people that actually register to join that platform. And once you identify that, you can test different things to see what improves that ratio. What we typically find is that it's best to have the latest activity of that community, the latest discussions or activities at the top of that community homepage. So don't have big graphics that take up most of your community homepage. When people visit your community for the first time, make sure that they can see all the exciting things that are happening in your community that they can participate in straight away. Don't appeal solely to newcomers. What happens too often is that an organization will have a big graphic there welcoming all their newcomers to the community and then bury everything else, all the important stuff, beneath the fold. And by beneath the fold, we mean beneath the point where you need to scroll down to see what's happening. What you need to do in pretty much every community is to make sure you have that latest activity above the fold at the very top of the landing page of your community. If you do this, then you should have far more people that are registering for your community. And in addition to that, you can try any number of different tweaks. You can change the positioning, the layout, the calls to action. But what you will find over a period of time, if you're measuring your data, you will learn exactly what works and what doesn't work. So once people have registered, what you want to do is to get them to participate as soon as possible. So when they register, you want to make sure that the welcome email, the confirmation message that they get, highlights something within the community that they can do straight away. Not a lot of things. Don't try and give them 10 different things that they can do. Just focus on one topical discussion or one blog post or just one specific thing that you want them to do next. And again, this is something that you can test and you can measure. But what you want to be doing at this stage is solely focusing on getting someone to make their first active contribution to that community as soon as possible. Because when someone participates in a discussion especially, they tend to come back and see the updates to that discussion. They tend to get caught up in that notification cycle where they're notified about what happens and then they come back to see the response and then they participate again and then they're notified when someone responds to that. And that gets people into the habit of participating very early on. And finally, when they do participate, you want them to become active members of the community 6 months later. Now that 6 months is relatively an arbitrary number. 3 months might be the case for some communities. But what we've typically found is that 6 months is the standard amount of time that someone has to participate in a community to be considered a regular active member of that community. So here you have to be looking at things like notifications. You have to be looking at how you socialize people in a community. How do you get people that have visited your community to get to know other people in that community? What sort of discussions are you guiding them towards? How are you going to give them greater levels of ownership over elements of that community? And there's so many different tactics you can use here, and I recommend that you refer to the last lesson for that. But the important thing is, again, that you're measuring this, because you can improve all these metrics so easily just by testing a few different things. So I strongly recommend that you spend a lot of time doing this, because if you do it right, your community will become so much bigger and so much more active so quickly. So that's a quick overview of the key points that we covered last week. I do recommend that you watch the video because we go into so much more depth on a tactical level. But what I would really love now are any questions that you have. We have put aside a lot of time for Q&A, so you can ask questions, get help on this topic, or if you have any other questions that are relevant to communities, perhaps you might like to ask them as well. So if you want to ask a question, you can use the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side of. So this is a really difficult question to answer because there isn't that much data there. So let's assume you've just arrived at a community that's fairly active. The first thing that I would recommend you do is look at your data right now. And to pretty much every community manager, that will be the most boring thing that they can think of doing. But if you do it, what it will tell you is what's going on in the community. Not what people are saying is going on, but what is actually going on. So you can see how many people are visiting the community, how many are converting into regular members, how many discussions are taking place. And you can also see if that number is going up or if it's going down. And in the areas where it's going down, those are the areas where you might like to spend more of your time. And you might also like to think about, particularly having calls or interviews with some of the top members of the community, because these are generally the people that you're going to need on your side. But the first step for pretty much every new community manager, particularly those that are moving into an existing online community, is to look at what your data tells you. If you're not comfortable using data, or if you haven't got any experience with that, then I recommend buying a book on the topic, because there are plenty out there that will tell you exactly what you need to look at and what that will tell you. So then you can focus specifically on where you can have the biggest positive impact in that community.
All right, excellent. And when you mention inviting some of the already active community members for a chat, would that be just a private chat to kind of get a bit of the history of the community from their perspective?
Sort of, but it's more to build up good relationships with the key people in the community. So if I was going into a new online community, I'd be very aware that I didn't know a lot about the history of the community, the cultural norms. I hadn't been given that level of respect yet that the previous community manager had. So what I'd want to do is talk to some of the top members of that community and get their ideas for what I should be working on, how I can help them, what I can do. I mean, if you want to take a shortcut here, then you can just post a discussion on the forum or somewhere on the community, asking people what they want, what can I do to help? And that can give you a lot of great ideas, and it can also show people that you're on their side. The one thing you don't want to do is when you move into a new online community is to make a lot of big changes really soon, because members will resent that, and then you risk the possibility of someone starting a new rival online community and bringing a lot of those members over to that community.
So what if you arrive at a new community and a lot of the data there shows you that big changes would be a good thing? Do you just approach those, identify maybe which would have the most positive impact and be the least jarring, and start there?
Well, interestingly enough, what we've found in online communities is that it's not the big changes that tend to make the big difference. It's very rare that a community needs a really massive change. What does tend to happen more frequently is that there's a lot of small changes that are required instead. So instead of having one big change that we need to completely revamp the community platform, what you more likely to need is, say, a regular schedule of discussions that take place, or more events, or to recruit some volunteers to help develop the community, or to create a regular schedule of content, or to have a regular interview series with top members. It's usually a lot of the really small things, that have a far bigger impact than any big change. If you do have to make a big change, what I would typically recommend is to let members know about it first, especially if you're new to that online community, because otherwise people do tend to resent it. What tends to happen in communities anyway is that people don't like big changes. So no matter what sort of change that you make, people are still going to be somewhat against it. But you can negate that to a certain extent by working with those top members in the community, by asking them their thoughts, their opinions, and being very clear and open with the community what the change is and why you're going to make that change.
This question from Gary kind of hits on some of the points of either taking over a community or just recognizing infighting within the community. Gary has two members who both came from another site where they clashed and one was banned. And now they're both on his site and they are they are rude and vile, he says. So I'm not sure, there's anything you could do in the welcoming process except maybe not welcome them at all. But if you wouldn't mind, Richard, addressing or giving some pointers to Gary there.
So before I answer that, I would say there are a lot of community managers that won't agree with what I'm about to say. My view is that it's perfectly fine to tell members that they're not a good fit for that community. What too many community managers do is that they spend hours upon hours trying to cater to the whims of the problematic members instead of just kicking them out. Now, I think it makes far more sense and it's far better for the community as a whole if you kick out the members that aren't a good fit for your community very quickly, and then do great things with all that extra time that you now have for the community. So organizing great events or writing great content or initiating interesting discussions or participating at a high level, because all these have a big impact upon the whole community instead of just trying to duplicate or always deal with the people that are problematic for the community. And one of the true things is that people that are problematic for a community are usually always difficult for that community. You're not going to change them. Their personalities aren't about to change. So I would be quite brutal here and just kick them out of the community. They're clearly not a good fit for that community, and you owe it to the other people in the community not to have these people there. But there are a lot of people, especially community managers, that would agree with that approach. But I think that your time is quite valuable, and you need to spend as much time doing work that affects as many members in the community as possible. What we've found with personally welcoming members is that the results are very mixed. So we found it doesn't help so much to personally welcome every newcomer to that community. It doesn't hurt, but it doesn't always help at all. And instead, there are certain categories of members that are far easier to convert. So again, our thinking here is that your time is limited, and personally welcoming members to a community isn't something that scales particularly well. So you can do it. If you have lots of spare time, then go ahead. But if you always have to do it, it's far better to look at what else can you do to guide someone to being an active member of that community that you can do once and then will work and it will help every single member of that community. So there are a variety of different things that we covered last week that you can do. If you are going to personally welcome someone to a community, then it's typically better to focus on people that have made their first contribution to that community, because these people, what we have some data on now, says it's far easier to give these people a welcome, and it has a huge impact compared to welcoming everyone to the community. But the impact that we've seen, at least, is quite minimal. But what I would recommend people do is just test it. So I'm sure somewhere you can get a list of people that have joined your online community in the last week or the last month. So give half of them a personal welcome and the other half don't do it, and then see what the results are. And I think for many community managers, they will find that the results are quite interesting.
How do you determine whether some of the members are not a good fit for your community? Either by this question comes from Lyudmila. Sorry if I just mispronounced your name there. But determining which members are a good fit for your community. Could you speak to that, Richard?
It's entirely subjective, of course. In my experience, a community manager usually knows, especially after doing the job for a while, or after running community for a while, they usually know who's going to fit in that community and who isn't quite early on. And that would be by the behavior that members exhibit quite early on. It'll be their attitudes, it'll be wherever their personalities are a fit for that community. So I can't answer in definitive metrics. What I would say is that really don't waste your time on the people that aren't a good fit for your community. These people might be perfect for other types of online communities, but they might not be right for your community. And if you want, you can start noticing the people that are difficult. What early behavior did they show that might have indicated they're not a good fit for that online community? Typically, I mean, a lot of community managers will remove members that are, say, rude or hostile to other members, but that's not always a bad thing for a community. Communities aren't these utopian places where everyone has to get along. And conflicts and fights can be a good thing for a community. They can get people quite passionate, they can get people visiting more often. So it can be a variety of different things that might make someone a bad fit for a community. So if you're, say, a legal professional, you probably don't want to be spending that much time in 4chan because that has a very different type and personality of community. So it's different for every community, and I wish I could answer more specifically than that, but hopefully that might help a little bit. Well, what you want to do is be spending as much time as possible with your best members and as little time as possible with your worst members. But it's very easy to get your ego caught up in a debate or a conflict with someone and then end up spending nearly all your time on the worst members of your community, and that's not what you want to be doing.
What do you do when your community starts to move away from its focus?
I would say go with it. So communities, they evolve, they adapt, the focus will change after a while, and that's perfectly fine. I think when you start preventing the community from doing what it wants to do, from talking about what they want to talk about, you're creating a great opportunity for another community to emerge that does fit that gap. And instead, it's far better to go with it and see where it goes, because communities do change, they do adapt. The people aren't interested in the same things forever. And one of the biggest mistakes I made in some of my first online communities is that the communities were based around different video games. But the video games have a short shelf life. And after the period of time, people find a new game. And instead of adapting and evolving with that, we used to spend a lot of time closing down communities, starting brand new ones. And it was a big mistake. It's far better to go with your audience and what your audience is interested in, rather than always trying to rein them in and trying to change their behavior. It's very hard to change someone's behavior. So what we typically want to do when someone joins an online community, you want to socialize them in that community. By socialize them, you want to be trying to, so when they visit your community, you want them to be trying to satisfy their social needs as opposed to just their needs for information. Because when people are trying to satisfy their social needs, what tends to happen is that they visit the community more frequently and for a much longer period of time. So what we want to be doing is trying to make sure that when people join a community, they're told a little bit more about the community. So a welcome pack or a welcome message of sorts, especially if done in the right way, can be a really powerful thing here. So what we might want to include is some information about the history of the community, some of the goals of the community, perhaps links to the history of the community, perhaps an idea of who the top members are, what the top topics are. And another thing you might want to do at this stage is decrease the fear, the natural fear that people have of participating in a community for the first time. Because when you participate for the first time, especially if you're trying to initiate a discussion, you don't know if that discussion has been asked 20 times in the past. You don't know if it's a topic that no one wants to talk about anymore. So it might be a good idea for many communities to clearly list what types of discussions have come up over and over again. Where can people find most answers to a question that they're not sure about? It might be an idea to have, say, a specific place for newcomers to ask really dumb questions that they're shy about asking elsewhere. Because by simply having this place, it reduces that fear of someone participating for the first time. And when you set it up, that's a one-time thing that you have to do and can continue converting these newcomers into regulars indefinitely. So things like that can be a powerful thing. But what we do want in that welcome guide perhaps as well is some sort of constitution, some sort of founding document which highlights what people can do in the community. Too often people will send out long guidelines explaining to members what they can't do in the community. And this has the effect of guaranteeing that these guidelines aren't read. Where if you turn them into a more positive document, if you turn them into a document that tells people what they can be doing in the community, what they should be doing in the community, and make it sound exciting and interesting, then people are not only likely to read it, they're also likely to follow those sorts of behaviors that you see other people exhibiting as well. So these sorts of things can be very powerful one-time interventions that you can make that help convert more newcomers into regulars that are far stronger than just that personal welcome, which you have to repeat every day or 5 times a day, or if your community gets really big, you might end up doing it 50 or 100 times a day.
Are there any gamification concepts that can be used to engage newcomers? This question comes from Mark.
So gamification is a very tricky topic. So gamification tends to work well for things that aren't communities. So it can work well for platforms. So when LinkedIn wants you to complete your profile for example, having gamification elements there, telling you the percentage left that you have to complete, having you like collect friends and endorsements and all that stuff. Those are very powerful things for getting someone to use a platform. For online communities, gamification really hasn't helped that much. And the data we have on it so far, and you can look this up on Google Scholar and other platforms, but the data we have so far paints a very mixed picture. So what gamification can do is that in existing online communities that are highly active, it can have a small increase in the number of times that members post. This is somewhat negated by the quality of those posts tends to decline because people are doing it to win a game rather than they're generally doing it because they believe in the community or for the intrinsic reasons that they have. So there's a great book called Punished by Rewards. And what this book highlights is that things like gamification and rewarding people for doing certain actions in the community can be a bad thing. It can change the motivation for someone doing that action from something that was intrinsic, whereby someone did it just simply because they loved doing it, to extrinsic. One of my first online communities was a video gaming online community, and I was spending about 40 hours a week running this community for free. And we had a webmaster that owned the site. And what happened, we got sponsors at some point, and then they began paying some of the people that were volunteers. And I quickly realized I was being paid pretty much a minimum wage for doing this. I was about 15 or 16 years old at the time. And I quit in disgust at being paid a minimum wage. So I was perfectly fine to do this for free, but once people started paying me for doing it, I didn't want to do that role anymore, simply because my motivation had changed. And there are a lot of things that work like that. So gamification can be quite a bad thing for communities as well. It can reduce the motivation for someone to participate. So in the short term, it probably will have a positive impact. Over the long term, they'll probably do more harm than good.
Would you consider highlighting members or featuring members kind of a gamification-like concept, or would that, because that seems it might change the motivation as well, still maybe intrinsic, but a little ego burst?
I mean, I guess you could class it under gamification, but what we typically mean by gamification are things like points, levels, awards, and stuff like that. So highlighting and giving people recognition tends to help. It tends to reinforce someone's reason for doing that activity, and it tends to encourage other people to take similar actions as well, because they're far more likely as a result to get some attention or to get greater recognition. I mean, the motivations why most people participate in communities is generally for that sense of power, for recognition or appreciation, or to have some sort of impact upon their surroundings or to make friends. So there are a variety of different motivations that you can feel that. So I mean, yes, it could be classed as gamification in a way, but it's not typically what people mean when they refer to it.
There's how the admin, other members, or the community system should or can automatically reward heavy participators effectively.
Well, here's an interesting question to think about in response. If people are already participating quite heavily, why do you need to reward them? If they're already doing the actions that you want them to take, why do you need to reward them? What you can probably assume is that they're taking these actions and they're continuing to take these actions because they're perfectly happy, they have some sort of motivation that's being satisfied already. So this group of people often isn't the group of people that you need to be worried about. What you do need to be worried about is when the average level of participation from that heavy user group might decline. But usually you might want to consider how you can stimulate more activity from the groups beneath them. So people that just joined the community, or people that say make 1 or 2 contributions a month but aren't really that active. It's these sorts of groups that you might want to spend more time on. In terms of how you automate that, I don't know. What we've typically found works best is when you give people increasing levels of power or responsibility, and when you show members that everyone in that community can have an influence over that community. So going back to motivations, what a lot of people want is to have that influence, to have that recognition, to have more power. And not every member can, but every member needs to believe that they can. Kind of like the American dream in a way. So every member needs to believe that if they work hard, then they might get some extra power within the community, they might be interviewed for the community, they might be mentioned in the community history, there might be certain things that they can get. But you don't need to automate this. This doesn't take that much work, and it's worth personally doing. It's worth personally profiling or interviewing perhaps your top members of the community. It's worth doing things that show all members that everyone in that community can have an impact to make great contributions to that online community.
Are there any other things that community managers can do to encourage and recognize their participation there?
Well, what tends to work best is that what you want, especially for example, newcomers that have joined the community, you might want to have, say, a newcomer of the week or profile of someone that's recently joined the community. Things that you can set up or have a volunteer organize or an existing member take responsibility for, that then continues indefinitely. Beyond that, I mean, there are so many different things that you can do that I'd probably recommend watching the webinar from last week instead. We generally haven't found it that useful. It's interesting, like, this is where the behavior online and offline is far more different from what most people expect. So whereas introductory threads can be quite popular, the reason why they're popular is because every single member is directed when they join the community to participate in this thread. What typically happens is that it's just people writing quite dull and tedious introductions about themselves that no one else in the community reads. And often we haven't seen much of a connection between someone participating in an introductory thread and then continuing to be a regular member of that community. What we have seen is that when you get someone or when you guide someone to participate in an active discussion about a particular topic right now, that tends to have a far more bigger impact upon them converting into a regular member of that community than just an introduction thread. So I'm not sure if introduction threads hurt, but there are certainly occasions where they don't help. What we have found is that it's great when there's a tradition in the community where regular members of the community introduce themselves to newcomers of that community. So they directly do it, they see the people that are new and they introduce themselves and ask them if they need any help or if there's anything that they can do for them, or if they need any tips about using the community platforms. That tends to work well. It's also good if the community manager can write, say, a regular summary of some new members that have joined the community that week, perhaps some basic details about them, something that's interesting and makes them stand out. Another thing that tends to work well is that when you have profile questions that are actually interesting instead of quite dull. So instead of location, age, profession, and stuff like that, Questions such as, for example, what was the greatest day of your life, or questions that are just really interesting. What's the scariest thing that ever happened to you? These sorts of questions tend to be fun and tend to get read. So if you can get a thread going where newcomers are guided towards answering fun questions that are like that, that tends to work much better than what can be quite a bland and tedious introduction thread. I have no data on it. What my instinct is that it probably doesn't make that much of a difference. And that's purely a guess. What does matter whether people make actual friends within the community, which has a huge impact. So what I think the data we had from, I think it was FriendFeed years ago, was that if people made 5 genuine friends in that community, then they were very likely to become regular long-term members of that community. So I think making genuine friends does make a big difference. Whether the friend feature helps, I have no idea. There's no platform yet that provides you with everything that you need. So what typically happens is that you know how many people visit, say, the registration page of your community and how many people visit your community by Google Analytics. You usually find out how many people register by either tracking a certain confirmation page that people go to after registering via Google Analytics, or by looking at the platform and see how many people registered during that period of time. Beyond that, it starts getting really difficult. So it becomes quite complicated to see how many people that registered for that community made a contribution to that community during that time. So I haven't found a platform yet that tracks that. But what we covered last week was doing a systematic sampling technique. So what this basically means is that you list all the members that joined during that month on the platform by the date that they joined. Then every, say, nth number, so every, say, 10th member that joined, so you count down and see if they made a contribution. And you do that as an overall percentage. So this isn't a precise figure, but it'll give you a very rough idea of how many people are making their first contribution, and that for now is something that you need to do manually. So perhaps in the future there might be a platform that can do that, or a way of tracking that that's quicker than this, but for now it's kind of more complicated than that. Then finally, if you want to know how many of them are members 6 months later on, then you need to use what we call a systematic and stratified sampling technique, which is kind of complicated to explain, but it basically means looking at different groups of people, where they dropped out, and again, counting down to every nth member, perhaps 5th member, perhaps every 10th member on that list, and finding out where they dropped out, and how many are still active, and things like that. So it's quite complicated to do, and it takes a couple of hours to do it, but it's something that's worth doing because it tells you exactly where members are dropping out. It saves you so much time later on, and it allows you to concentrate your time and your resources on the specific areas where members are dropping out. So if you find out that members are dropping out, say, after 3 months, you can put in an intervention specifically after 3 months. There's some sort of ritual or tradition or increasing level of power or responsibility that's going to get members over that hump. So that's just one example. There are many that you can use. But it's important that you are tracking this information. It's just going to take a little bit of time to do.
So thank you again, Richard. It's been a pleasure, and thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great day.